To bring our fourth in our series of 5 lectures on Truckee Meadows Livable Communities issues. We're very happy to have our speaker here today because he was stuck in Denver overnight and San Francisco, and so I think he's happy to be having his journey moved on because he's going back to New York tonight. I didn't get a chance to talk to him too much to think about how to introduce him, and he gave me an article it's written up in Governing magazine, and I see it's starting to make sense. I saw him speak in 2003 at the International Pedestrian Conference, and had heard of his work, for a number of years before. And he comes with a lot of eye candy because he's traveled and done this for years all over the world, showing about how communities should be thinking about the places, the public spaces that are sometimes the leftover thoughts in constructing our communities. And I'll just leave it at that. He's from New York City. He founded Project for Public Spaces over 20 years ago, and his footprint is over many public spaces all over this country and others. So, Fred Penn.
So then I'm supposed to put this on. Is that okay? Does that work for you? Is that good? Well, I'm really glad to be here. I don't know what time. I was up long before you even, maybe some of you went to bed, but I started out this morning at 4 o'clock in Denver, trying to see if I could get here. And I went out to the airport, and already it seemed like it was the Times Square or something. At 5 a.m. I was there, and there was a lot of lines, and so I got on a short line, and then I realized it was probably the right line because it was the one for people whose flights had been canceled. And I got up there at 5:30, and I got to the person, and I said, I got to get to Reno. Can I get on this 6 a.m. flight to San Francisco and then come here? And she worked a little bit and said, yeah, I got you the last seat. And last night when I called, it was overbooked by 13. So something happened between then and then. And then I got to the airport. I was the first person off the plane, and I missed the connection to here by 4 minutes or something like that. So then I spent 4 hours in the airport. And now I'm here. And then I spent an hour with this character here, driving around. I have never seen a city faster in a shorter period of time. And but you know something? I think I could repeat that whole trip, because I have a photographic memory of every place I go, and I take a lot of pictures. So anyway, you've got a wonderful city, and the parks you have are really exceptional parks. Exceptional parks. And that's rare that we come to a city where you see them, because there's so many different things you can do in those parks, and I'll sort of weave that through. But you have streets that aren't performing very well as public spaces, and so your biggest opportunity is in your streets and getting them back to where they can become really good places again. And I'll go through a lot of different things, but it's kind of, you have this image of Reno as just a lot of sprawl, which I guess it really is. But the areas that we covered were really precious, and they could get worse or they could get better. And I mean, just about every street we went on had potential for becoming a better street and a better public space, a better destination. Maybe you just say a couple of streets, the main streets that we went on. I don't remember the names of them, but I don't want to, so you could tell me.
We made a full circle, and we took off down California Avenue over to the kayak park.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
That was, went over to California Avenue, over the high school, the Idlewild Park.
Yeah, Idlewild is a magnificent park.
Fell over the university,
yeah.
And down Wells Avenue.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. So we'll talk about that. So if we were to suggest that you built your city around places, and this is a wonderful library, what would your city be like? would be very different than it is today, because you developed the city around places 30 to 50 or 75 years ago. Neil knows all the dates but recently I think you're trying to get back to that, but there was this enormous gap where you really lost a lot, and getting it back is a really, on many levels, is what I think you could really turn this into an extraordinary city. And I think you're headed in the right direction. But also, what if we build our cities around happiness and community well-being? So those are two questions. And there are actually a number of mayors that are now looking at this as their purpose, their goal. And they are some of the most powerful mayors in the world that are thinking about cities in a much more holistic, humanistic way, rather than through the disciplines that have defined our cities over the last 50 years in a way that reflects more their discipline than the purpose of building a city. And I'll get into that. So we run programs in all these areas, and they're major programs. And every one of them is a cutting-edge effort. Transportation livable communities. I used to say, whatever a traffic engineer says, do the opposite, and you'll be building your community. And then we got hired by the State Department of Transportation in New Jersey to do the opposite and to train all the traffic engineers in New Jersey how to build communities and create places. And we're now starting in New Hampshire. We're doing the long-range transportation plan for New Hampshire. And guess what? It's not about cars or traffic. It's about communities and how transportation can build and support communities. And I'll show you some things about that. So in terms of public markets and local economies, what's going on with us right now is we're getting enormous amounts of foundation money that are coming to us. Foundations are coming to us and asking us to develop market programs all over the United States. And Ford Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are just literally unloading tons of money that we then turn around and give and grant to communities to build markets or local economies with a strong immigrant orientation. So the whole idea of creating communities through local entrepreneurship and markets is a big deal for us. In terms of public buildings and civic design, we've been working with the federal government in about 25 communities on a good neighbor program so that federal buildings are good neighbors in the communities they're in. And we've been doing a lot of work on architecture, and I'm going to go through how architecture is really, truly off track from what it needs to be and how we need to see architecture. I have to give a talk at Harvard on Thursday on this topic, which is kind of unusual because it's actually not to the architecture school, but it's to the planning school. And we'll see if there's any architects that come, because I really take architects and work them over a bit. And then parks, plazas, and civic squares. We're moving away from this kind of look but don't touch, neat, clean, and empty, open space idea to an idea of real gathering places, to very exciting, dynamic civic squares. So that's kind of where things are moving, and you're seeing lots of more interest in the civic square, the return of the civic square. And I used to work with this man, Holly White, who wrote the organization, man, the exploding metropolis was really new urbanism. And the last landscape was about cluster development. It was sort of the first round of new urbanism. And then he started working in New York, and then I worked with him from 1970 on the social life of small urban spaces in the city, rediscovering the center. But he was an extraordinary man who really was 20, 30 years ahead of his time, seeing some of the big ills of the city. And when he died, we found this quote, "I end in praise of small spaces. The multiplier effect is tremendous. It is not just the number of people using them, but the larger number who pass by and enjoy them vicariously, or even the larger number who feel better about a city center for knowledge of them. For a city, such places are priceless, whatever the cost. They are built of a set of basics, and they are right in front of our noses if we will look." And that whole idea is what I think about every day as when I get up, it's sort of like my mantra. What are those places that make a community, a neighborhood, a school, whatever it is, a special place? And we have 25 people who work in our office, and most of us are traveling all over the world, working every part of the world we're busy in right now. We just got someone just came back today from Moscow, and we've been working in Serbia and Croatia and Montenegro and Armenia and South America. So we do the training and all of that, and there's a lot more. We're just passing our 30th anniversary, and each sort of 5 years we have this amazing kind of looking back what we were able to accomplish, and looking forward what we're going to do is just amazing. So you need to follow us but we've worked in 48 states, 23 countries now, 1,200 communities. We get 3,000 people a day coming to our websites. We have the 4 program areas you saw. We get our electronic newsletter goes out to 40,000 people, and that's growing very rapidly. If you don't get our newsletter, it's free. It's at pps.org. You should look at it. And we have these issue papers that we've worked on over the years, that all about these preserving the commons, keeping the public and public spaces, safety and security, health and community design, community places, an antidote to sprawl, and all these things are a very important part of the newsletter. And the newsletter, of the websites, and the 30 years of placemaking, what if we build our cities around places, which I'm going to talk about, parks, shedding lights on markets, politics of placemaking, the New York City parks, how they thrive in tough times, the birth of a movement. We think placemaking is a movement that is universal and international, and return to the civic square. These are the people that have been the transformative people around place. William White, Christopher Alexander, Donald Appleyard, Dan Burden, Jan Gale, Roberta Gratz, Tony Hiss, Alan Jacobs, Jane Jacobs, James Kunstler, Claire Cooper, Marcus Rayolenberg, Enrique, and we're working on another list of developers that have been really doing amazing development work. And then we have I don't know how many, couple 100, 300 places that people talk about, the best neighborhoods, the best districts in the world, world-renowned places, great community places, and then a lot of people are nominating them. And so those are they're amazing, because when you start, if you have any interest in any topic like streets or parks or plazas, you can go and you can get the best in the world and see how they work. And then we've been doing these city commentaries on Barcelona, London, and Paris, and we're finishing up the one in New York right now. And these are the publications. So these are just to show you this idea of place and placemaking, which is what we do all over the world. These are the cities that we're active in right now. Just within this month, these are the places that we're working. And these are the countries or states. The whole country of Scotland we're training all kinds of people in Scotland about placemaking, and in Sweden we're doing the whole housing industry. 60% of housing in Sweden is public housing, and we're training that group. I'm going week after next to the Netherlands to do work all over that country, in Serbia, Montenegro, Australia, the summer, New Jersey, the whole transportation issues in New Jersey, smart growth, we're doing a whole program there, the state transportation plan. In San Mateo County, we're working from San Francisco down to San Jose on the corridor, El Camino Real, Pacific Northwest. Is a whole placemaking movement. And then we have all these market programs in cities all over the country with markets. So we're really busy, and we're getting busier every day. It's sort of escalating. So getting into the presentation, Holly White said, it's hard to create a place that will not attract people. What is remarkable is how often it's been accomplished. We have this ability to design, but we don't understand how to create a good place. And this is Boston City Hall Plaza, and that's the central square in Prague. And really they're the same size, but one of them you can do things in, the other one is just you look at it. And then we shape our public spaces, and afterwards they shape us. This is a piece of architecture in Houston, and here's a human being right here, and there's the entranceway. And between the bank president hates this building. He's a retail banker and he needs customers. And he says the only people that come to this building are the architect and the interior designer to talk about it. And he needs customers to come to the building. And the chairs inside where you fill out your loans are designed like this. And this is considered heavy traffic right now. And if, 2 more cars, what we always say is between the traffic engineer and the architect, they've created an almost pedestrian-free environment. And when we go to travel, we'll go to a street like this. And this street, you can go there 100 times and see 100 different things every time. So this is a truly great street. But we don't kind of want those streets to be in our lives, but that's where we go and spend them when we go traveling. And this is where we, we don't go to that except for the designers and talk about it. And then Jane Jacobs said, lowly, unpurposeful, and random as they may appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life may grow. Well, imagine these 5 men around one of these columns. Would they still be smiling, or would they be considered loitering? So we're designing people out of our cities with the kind of architecture is look but don't touch, neat, clean, and empty, no people, no problem. And then the street is the river of life, the place where we come together, the pathway to the center. That's what it used to be. And now it's just become a river of traffic. And we, you, everyone defines their cities and neighborhoods around traffic. And guess what? If you design your city around cars, you get more cars. It's absolutely true. And that's what you've done. That's what we've done. That's what everyone has done. And we're beginning to move away from that. So what if we defined our city around people? We would get more people. So that's a big difference. So what do we have? We don't have people that define our cities around people. We have traffic engineers whose focus is cars. But what about public spaces? What about people? What about communities? What about neighborhoods? So that's what I'm focusing on and what people love when you go out there. I mean, this is not a hard thing to sell because who would want just more cars to destroy our neighborhoods? But we also get involved in design, and this is a piece of design, and it's not a place at all. And this is a great place. This is in Laguna Beach in California, 2 half-court basketball right next to a playground, there's a water fountain. People are playing volleyball. Someone's getting married down there, a little garden, a playground. And it's right on the Pacific Coast Highway, right across the street from the downtown. It's a great destination, a truly, truly great destination. And all this is a buried bicycle. And what do you do there? Not much. And this is up in Bellevue. If no one wants to go out to the park, no one's going to stop them. And this kind of arc, what is that? It's just something that looks good from the air. But if you really want to get into a place that has soul and spirit, you go to a place like that, which is absolutely fantastic. So, and this is art. We don't know what this means yet. It still doesn't, but I do know what that means. And, you can learn a lot from that. And not so much from that, I guess. I don't know what it is. And so what is the future of our cities? What are we going to paint on that? What is Reno going to do to get something really good on that painting thing? So I'm going to go over these topics. And I invite you to stop me at any time and figure out, am I better if I'm here? I'm okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what is placemaking. I'm going to talk about the power of 10. I'm going to talk about what the obstacles are to creating places. I'm going to talk about creating great public buildings, about great parks, squares, and plazas, about markets and local economies, and then creating great streets. And then the whole idea of comfort and happiness and affection. Okay, but I invite you to stop me anytime. So just feel totally comfortable because it's more fun for me to have a discussion about something or answer a question or, to try to explain something a little differently for you. So, and it's a good size audience to do that. So, what is a place? For us, it's comfort and image, uses and activities, access and linkage, and sociability. So when you think of any place, and we'll go through this again and again so you'll get it clearer, and your intuitive feelings about a place are the most important one. So if you think of a good place, like, is it Idlewild Park, is that the name of it? A wonderful park. You could evaluate it, but you could also go through the whole park and go into 10 parts of it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But is it safe, charming, clean, attractive, historic? Is it connected, walkable, convenient, accessible? Is it fun, vital, active, special, real? Is it welcoming, cooperative, and neighborly? Yeah, I would say that's pretty good. I think that's an extraordinary destination. And if you look at these quantitatives or measurables, the street life, evening use, volunteerism, transit, pedestrian activity, crime stats, sanitation ratings, retail sales, property values, a lot of those would be pretty good too. So that would be a great destination. And what do these places do? What does a good place do? It nurtures a sense of community, improves safety and security, fosters meaningful interaction, supports community health, enhances accessibility for all, and builds local economies. So this idea of placemaking with those results is a pretty powerful idea of how you can build your communities around places, what you can do. So this is in Arvada, Colorado, and this is down in Mexico City, in Coyacana neighborhood. The pastor, they're both Catholic churches. I was standing here with this pastor, and he was looking at these houses, and he tore them down to create his domain, to increase his domain. And we were thinking of this church, which is the center of that community, in Mexico City. And that is a great, great destination with a great park, great entranceways, and a lot of passion. Now, what's the choice? And we're making that choice today because we think of parking before we think of people. We think of cars before we think of people. And so we're getting these kinds of results instead of those kinds of results, which we'd much rather have that. I don't think anyone would say you don't want that. So another idea of a place, so that's a place, and the other is not a place, obviously. It may be an institution. This is a building, that's an institution, but this is a real place. And you'll see that as we go along. So now here in Hollywood, California, North Hollywood, we were working with a redevelopment agency around bus stops. So this is obviously not a place. But we thought about creating a place there. So if you take that, and that stick has a small bus stop, but you work with this was owned by the redevelopment agency, and you work with that property owner, and you create that place, and then all of a sudden, it's a little park with food, and then Starbucks moves across the street, and businesses start to build up around it. You've created a place. So you have bus stops all up and down a lot of these streets, but I don't think any of them are places. So there's an opportunity right there. And so guess what? The transit agency is a partner in placemaking. And if their job is not just transit, but it's working with communities to build places, you have a whole network of opportunities throughout bus stops. And after people drive buses, I don't know how would like anyone, because it's the richest, most aloof, most elite. So in San Mateo, we've offered this service. So what are the placemaking opportunities? Stops, stations, main streets, avenues, streets, and roads. These are the two that really form your whole city, unquestionably. You're doing a great job, but you need a lot more parks, especially outside. All I've seen is the old part of the city, and I'm sure that you're not doing anything like this outside that. And then the plazas, and this is a whole area that you could do a lot more in. Libraries and hospitals could be great destinations on multiple levels. Schools. See, I don't think any public building should be an isolated building. It should be larger. So I'll show you something. I'll show that in a couple of examples. Obviously, we were working in Lindsay a week before last, and they have 10,000 people live there, and 22 churches and schools. And so the head of the school board and some of the churches were at our meeting, and they're going to go and work with the churches and the schools to create places out of them. And what a novel idea. And then cultural institutions, like you have a nice museum, but I'm going to talk a little bit about your museum. And then you have a mixed use, the mixed use housing and retail. So now this is a very, very powerful idea. Flying down in here this morning or this afternoon, and thinking about this whole region, you need 10 major destinations, okay? Now, within the city or the cities that you have within the basin, I guess, whatever you call it, you need 10 places in each of those. And in each of those 10 destinations, you need 10 places within it. And with each of those places, you need 10 things to do. Now, Idlewild Park is a great, great park, because if you were to look at the 10 destinations in there and the 10 things you do, you could improve it quite a bit. But it is a gem already. So you see what I'm getting at on this power of 10 as you get down? Well, and you can do that along a street. See, I don't believe at all in the word streetscape. I believe in creating places along the street. Now, what is the one that we were driving down that they were starting to put the median in?
Wells Avenue.
Wells Avenue. That could become a great street, but I don't think the median is the right solution. I think it's creating the 10 places along that and figuring out how to make each place work and then designing the street to support that. So that's an opinion, but you're sort of shaking your head a little bit or thinking about it, or we can talk about this later. I'll drop these little bombs just for the fun of it, and we can then talk about it if you want, or we can stop and talk about it also. I don't mind. But as you begin to start getting these, you all of a sudden start getting districts that are 1,000 things to do, you see. So we don't do this. Who's doing this? Who's responsible for creating those destinations or those places? And then triangulation is where you put 3 or 4 things together, and I'll show you that very clearly. So what are the main obstacles? You have politically motivated, crisis-driven. Governmental structure is not about placemaking. It is not set up to create places. It's a project focus versus a place focus. I'll show you about that. Discipline-driven, one-dimensional projects, and then fear is a powerful motivator in the wrong direction. So this is when you build a road, this is what you do. This is the process that you're required to go through. But it also is, in a way, the same process when we build a project, a building or a one-dimensional project. You project purpose and goal, you identify constraints, you design to avoid constraints, you evaluate impacts to constraints, and then you get public input. Mitigate damages, get environmental approvals, get public input, design and build. You're guaranteed that this is good. You're going to turn out with something worse than what you started out with, unquestionably. And it has never turned out the other way I've ever seen anywhere in my life. So these goals are narrowly defined. The project scope and assessment is defined by the boundaries of the disciplines, relies on professionals and experts. It's very expensive, big project mentality. Community is set up to resist changes and results in limited civic engagement. It's a no-win, lose-lose, enormously costly, destructive process. And so if you take this and you put it into kind of a digestion system and you start up here and then you get this enormous indigestion, and then I have 2 versions of this, and I should have left the other one in, but you really have to start over because you really haven't done anything. For Neil, I should have shown this piece of crap right there, and that's what it is. It is just a piece of crap that it results in this thing. Now, I hope he's famous for this. I don't know. But the alternative approach is a very powerful, positive approach. It's about place. It's about define the place, identify stakeholders, and this is what we train traffic engineers in doing. And this is their new job. Their old job is no good. It destroys communities. Absolutely destroys communities. So you evaluate place, get a vision. The stakeholder roles are advise, suggest, bring additional resources. Experts, you become a resource. You facilitate and you help implement the vision. You do short-term experiments, long-term vision implementation, and ongoing evaluation. This empowers communities, attracts partners, money and creative solutions. Professionals become resources. They actually become more important in this process. Design supports the uses. Solutions are flexible. Engagement and commitment grow. Yesterday and Saturday, we were working on the Denver train station with 200 people from the community on how to create a place there. And they did a beautiful job, and we now know what to do there because they told us what they would do if they went there. So this is a powerful community building, placemaking tool for communities. And it changes the whole role of the neighborhood and the citizen to become the expert. And the expert becomes the resource. So it shifts everything around. So here's just an example of a piece of architecture. And the person who did that got the Pritzker Prize, which some people say is the most important prize in architecture. I don't think so. And this is just a piece of junk. But they're both libraries. This is an awful building, terrible building. And it may have won an award for some kind of material or something, but I hope it didn't win an award as a piece of architecture. So I happen to like that architecture, but this piece of architecture is absolutely not a place. This is absolutely a place. So here's the bus stop in the award-winning architect's building. So they clearly didn't have any connection with the transit agency when they built this. And there's the bus stop in the non-award-winning building. And here's the entranceway to the award-winning architect's building. And this is where you sit if you want to wait for someone to pick you up. You can only come by car. It's downtown. You know, it's downtown is like this library is downtown. But on this one, you can sit on the front porch. This is in San Bernardino, and this is in San Antonio. And then this is the park in the award-winning one. And we don't know what you do there. And this is the park in the non-award-winning one, which is next to the Mission Inn, next to a city hall, next to two churches, and is truly a centerpiece of that community. So supposing that we had that piece of architecture that awful piece of architecture was great architecture and a great place. That hasn't been done yet. In my opinion, nowhere in the world have we created a great place with architecture, contemporary architecture today. And I have to say, I don't think your museum is a great place. Okay? So we'll go through this and you'll see. So now this is a piece of architecture. This is Frank Gehry in Bilbao. And it really has done a remarkable thing for Bilbao. But what's so interesting is that this is dead. Everything around this is dead. The whole city is alive, but when this architecture is just dead. And the reason is that you may think that those stairs go somewhere. They don't. And that's the entranceway. It's not. This is the entranceway down in this hole. And if you look at those stairs, if you can imagine trying to walk up and down those stairs, how uncomfortable that would be, because you go up one step and then flat and then up a step and then flat. It is just a disaster, and they had to put that railing in, and there's some other pictures I don't have on here, but it is just an amazing place. And you go down there, and what do you see down there? There's not much more. All the building is the museum, not the exhibit. But the sad thing about this is that my son was there on his honeymoon, and he took a picture of these two guys. And right after this picture was taken, these two guys mugged the third person in the plaza. So, and I forgot to point out that Frank Gehry says I don't do context. I don't do context. Well, why don't you put it out in the middle of the desert if you don't do context? Because communities are about context. And so after you go about another couple hundred yards away, human life starts to reappear. And then as you get into the real city, it's a great city. But this is dead, a dead building. So there's this thing going on that really gets me angry. And these are people from architecture schools. Communities get in the way of the future, especially for architecture. Now this guy is dean of the architecture school at Cornell. And then neighborhoods prevent the imagination of architecture. He's at Harvard. And then this Amanda Burden used to work for us, is now the planning director in New York. When we ask, neighborhoods are what matters to New Yorkers and what is what we are trying to keep. And that is what we're trying to keep. And then this guy says maybe architecture is about designing for human delight, not for potential gloom. So you see, there's this real rift between people who want buildings and architecture to be friendly and comfortable and those who are driven by their egos. And this is in Milwaukee, a brand new building by Calatrava. And we are trying to find out what you could actually do here besides look at it. And we haven't figured it out yet because, it is kind of interesting, I guess. Whoops. But this is, again, the park, or one of the parks. And I don't know what you do there yet. And this is another one. I don't know what you do there either. So, and then this is the old museum, and that's the connection between the old and the new. And then this is the inside. I don't know where the art is yet, but there's a little bit there. But once again, we've got a building which is totally lifeless from a human point of view. And you go 2 or 3 blocks and you get down to a square and where people are, again, doing something. So, and then this guy, Rem Koolhaas, who has been anointed as kind of the most original architect of today, says it's a shame that Jane Jacobs' work has disconnected the study of cities from cities. She has created an era of hyper-nostalgia which gets in the way of progress. That's all about, eyes on the street and walking and all that stuff. And then this guy, Jane Jacobs, was the first real brave attempt to understand how cities work. Well, this was all said by people in a little conference that was held in New York over a few days. And so you see the rift and how architects are trying to separate them from human life. And I know that a lot of architects are trying to bring that back, but they're not given the credit or the support. There's no real support system for doing that. So this is his building in Seattle, and all the architecture critics thought it was fantastic, and we put it on our Hall of Shame because we can't find the entranceway, and there's no context, and there's nothing else to do but go to the library. And it doesn't fit into a city. It's a standalone building, isolated from everything else. So each profession has become its own audience. And that is the tragedy of the last 50 years. It is an amazing situation. And by placemaking, we can actually bring that back. And we as professionals become resources to communities rather than, quote, the expert or the ego that defines the future of communities. We can help a community define it and elevate the idea of design enormously to become something which adds grace and context and sensitivity to community life. What a great idea to have architects do that again. But we don't do that at all. I haven't seen it. So this is an icon too. Now, these people are fascinated by what it is. It just happens to be Notre Dame in Paris. So we can all look at these buildings, but I venture to say that there are infinitely more people looking at this building than the other two we showed you, because around this building are all these sort of market stalls, book stalls, postcards, and it's tucked into a neighborhood on a river. It's a spectacular destination, and it has Paris's oldest parks. So you go there, and tourists go there, but neighbors go there too. So it's just filled with community life, and tourists and neighbors are really very well integrated. Our office is in Greenwich Village in New York, and it's the same thing. We have tourists coming from all over the world, but there's a strong neighborhood presence there, and we all know each other in the neighborhood. So, and then this just blew me away. This is in the Czech Republic. We've been doing a lot of work in the Czech Republic, and we took a tour of people there, and somehow we ended up in this town, which didn't really have a lot going on for it, but it was a hotel that was there. And we got up very early in the morning, we walked down the main street, and we didn't know what this building was. This one here was beautiful, beautiful building. This we knew is the city hall, and we knew that the one down at the end on that is the bank. And so we walked down, and then we came back, and we saw all these teenagers gathering around the building. And we began to realize that this was the high school for the town. What an amazing thing, that the high school is tucked between the city hall and the bank. Now, can you imagine if you're going to a high school like that, what you might do after school? You might go to City Hall and work, or you might go to the bank and work. But how far do you have to walk? You know, you're in the town. You're important. You're not only important, you have the best building in the whole city. That's how they think of people who go to school. And what do we do with our schools? Where do we put them? And how do we isolate them away from everything so that they're not integrated into our communities? You know what is so true is that everyone wants this, but they don't know how to get it. Everyone wants it. I guarantee you.
Yes, but you know
But we're set up not to deliver it. Our governmental structure does not deliver it. Our professions don't deliver it. The institutions that we run don't deliver it.
You need a vision.
You need a vision. But I went to California 2 weeks ago, and they had heard me talk in Roseville, and they're doing a library, and guess what? They're going to put a laundromat and a coffee shop and a children's playground around the library and create a little square. Now, it wasn't hard. There was no reason why they couldn't do it.
It's not rocket science.
It isn't rocket science. We also took a park, which was a lot of grass, and because it's a Latino culture, that they wanted a square and a market, and so there's going to be a market and a square there, and some fairly active recreation square type activities. But that wasn't hard either. You know, nothing was hard because no one realizes how much we've built up these sort of silos of narrow thinking without just kind of connecting out. You know, so.
So how do we break? So would you get your whole group and come here?
No, you can do it yourself. I mean, it's common sense. That's all it is.
Well, you can stand up in front of a lot of council and planning commission meetings and say all these things.
Yeah.
They all look at it and say, oh, that's nice.
Well, we have a website, 3,000 people a day come to it, about these issues. We're covered in major magazines, and people are flocking to this idea in great numbers. There is no resistance. We're training people all over the world in this. We'll train 10,000 people in this year alone on this idea of making places. And the biggest obstacles are, you know, the government, the professionals, and they've got to get out of the box. And traffic engineers will. Architects are harder because their whole ego is vested in this thing, and landscape architects are trying to be like architects. So they have a problem.
But that's also the education.
Yeah, it is the education. Right. Yeah. So it's so interesting. We're going to do a campus plan for Harvard. Now, they didn't hire anyone from the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I wouldn't hire anyone from the Harvard Graduate School of Design to work for us. So we're being asked by people who run the university to do something that their own institution in the university wouldn't even be able to do. Make a place that's comfortable and pleasant for students to come to. What an original idea. So it's, you know, there's a lot of disconnects out there.
Yeah, well, Rena was unique in that it had the beauty already.
Yes.
In other words, it was all here.
You haven't.
And
You're losing it.
Losing it so quickly
Yeah.
that in the time that it's going to take to implement changes, everything's already been planned out, and the planning mentality is pretty much shopping malls and no public spaces.
Okay.
Outside the
Right,
city.
outside the city, yeah.
So I was just wondering wondering.
So I would just put a moratorium on all development until you have a whole series of places defined, because you see what we say, and where we're doing this all over, is first of all define your places, and then put the development around your places.
Because they make the land
Right.
react to the project
Right.
instead of the projects
Right.
reacting to
The place,
the place.
right, yeah.
You can't-
So moratorium, right away, start with a whole placemaking agenda. Yes, we're getting a good discussion now, go ahead, yeah.
And I didn't ask a question because I really want you to have time to get to the public displays of affection point.
Yeah,
which is
you'll
the
get,
last point. So
you will love that. We will do that.
you could bash Rena for a long time, and
But you see, what I'm really saying and why I wanted to have this discussion is that the old part of your city is precious. And you did this. You did it. And now you're not doing it. And you're losing it little bit by little bit. And I'm going to challenge you to go back and get it, and it's not hard. Well, does anyone else have an answer to that? About how do you turn that over and start with a place? How do you invest in it? Does anyone else know the answers to that? Because you're all more connected to this community than I am. We're actually doing this in Florida in a place, and the city that's losing its center because of the highway department is going to ruin it. Wants us and the developer we're working with to create a new center, so we're building a center as part of the development. And the public spaces are going to be defined first, and then the housing and the retail will be put around it. So that's what, and that's what the city has demanded that we do there. So how do you create a great destination? 80 to 90% of the success of a place is management. There's the inner and the outer park. You can't ever think of things as isolated within it. You have to think of all the area around it. The idea that you can't know what you're going to end up with as you develop a project is very powerful because it releases you from having to know the final answer. Some of the stuff you're doing is way over designed and really quite beyond what you really need to do, and that you really should think about how management can help facilitate and support activity in the places that you have put too much design into. That you need a lot of flexibility. Form supports function. You're creating a place, not a design. This is a very, very different idea. The seasonal programming and that underlying ownership needs to be in place for multiple sources of and forms of support. Management needs money to be able to do it. And you'll see what we mean. This was a park that we just square in Detroit, which is now the Central Square in Detroit, which was just completed about 4 months ago. And we do the vision of the activities and uses, and then a designer comes along and actually implements it. But this is ground zero in Detroit, the main center of Detroit. This is one that we did in 2 months in Armenia, and this is what it was like before, and that's what it's like after. Yeah?
What do you mean by management?
Well, it's really kind of, it's programming, but it's also design. Like you might put a cafe out. That's management. You might build a gazebo. You might build a temporary structure, and I would call that management. You see, so it's a fairly broad definition of management. There's an enormous amount of design involved in management. Once you've figured out the uses in a place, how do you support those uses? Well, design is absolutely fundamental in it. It's got to be very carefully done and thoughtful and beautiful. So design and management really go together in our view. You see, you do the infrastructure, and then the uses and activities, that's where the really important design is. So design is less about shapes and forms and metaphors and objects and stuff like that. It's more about uses and activities and how to support it. Is that pretty clear? Because it's a big difference between the two. So here's a piece of design that is real bad. This Edaw and a landscape architect in Barcelona did this. And this is it. It's a bunch of towers in the park, a shopping center that really operates more at the second level with a plaza on the second level, not at the street level. And this is what it looks like in around the buildings, the base of the buildings. Well, I don't know what you do there. And this is the park, which at first glance might seem kind of interesting. But as you look at it a little closer, This is, we're not sure exactly what that is. They call it a misting device. But other than that, there's not much there. And then this is about grasses. And then you begin to realize that nowhere in this park can you touch the water. And they do these mounds. Landscape architecture today is about grasses and mounds and metaphors and whatever. And then this is the seating. And I think of this as the mother and the daughter and then the son-in-law, you know, far enough away to not really get too engaged. And that, but if you bring a fourth person, you have to sit on the ground. And then this stuff, and that's innovative design, and the people that do this are now branded. This is their brand for their way of doing landscape architecture. Now, we put this on our Hall of Shame in about 30 seconds. And boy, I get emails last week from the head of EDOS saying, when are you going to take our thing off the Hall of Shame? And I keep telling her we're going to put more things on the Hall of Shame that they do, because what they do is nothing to do with human life and human activity. So, and then this is the playground. And they say, oh, well, people go to it and it's very popular. Well, if you have any kind of an open space, people will go to it. But look at what people are doing in it. What are the 100 things that they can do in that park? There's not anything you can do in the park. Great parks are like your park, Idlewild Park. There's 100 things you can do in that park. And it's a spectacular park. And people come, children come to this place in the grass because it's more interesting. So, you know, again, Yogi Berra said if people don't want to come out to the park, nobody's going to stop them. This is a park in Houston, and we're now going to work in Houston next week on an 11-acre park. But this is called Market Square. And we were brought in about 15 years ago to fix this park up. And we suggested putting a market in Market Square. What an original idea. Well, it was a park, and you can't put commercial activity in a park, even though it was called Market Square. So, you know, there will be a market in Market Square before this year is out, I guarantee you. But this is what, to me, is so interesting, and you'll like this. This is Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. And this is just absolutely fascinating. This was built in 1843. Okay? Now, Neil, this is a good date for you. Okay, 1843. It was inspired by the so-called romantic pleasure gardens of Europe. It was romantic in the sense that they were landscaped according to the English tradition of forming naturalistic ornaments, as opposed to the French style with its strong geometric lines. Okay? Now, sometimes I show some of the French parks in here, but this is so interesting because what they put in it in 1843 was a bazaar for trading Danish and foreign products, a concert pavilion, a theater for dance and masks, a cosmorama or a panorama, fireworks platform, swings, merry-go-rounds and slides, skittle alleys and other games, billiards, a restaurant, coffee houses and smoking salons, and patisseries. That is a pleasure garden. We have so dumbed down our parks so that they're just open space instead of real gathering places. Now that was so amazing that they did it, and what happened is they began construction in May of 1843, finished it on August 15th of 1843, opened the doors to the public. The season closed 2 months later, and 175,000 people went to that pleasure garden in that period of time. And it is as busy and active or better today than it was when it was open. So it's not saying you should do this here, but this idea of this kind of, you know, park, pleasure garden, center of activity, multicultural, market, all that kind of stuff, all put into, say, a 5-acre place, is a powerful, powerful destination. And so, and this is right next to the City Hall. This is not anywhere far away. It's right next to the City Hall, and it is just jammed with people all summer long. They close it in the middle of the winter. They open it at Christmas now. And so those are just some. And this is so funny. It's so tight that this is a coffee house under the playground. You know, that's how dense this is. And that's sort of the way it's laid out. I don't have a good picture. I'll get a better one. But this is the City Hall is right there. And it is an amazing destination.
How many acres is it?
I think it's about 5 or 6 acres. It's not very big. I have to get that information. I did know it at one point. So this is a great square in Portland. And we were brought in to work on it a few years ago, and it was very interesting to work on it, and I'll explain it as we go along what happened. This has made Portland. It has defined Portland. It is the city's living room. And the transit, there we go. The transit comes right into it. And in fact, transit was really the prime funder of it to create the square. But what is so interesting about this is that it works because it's programmed with activities and events. But it is not a good design. Now, from our point of view, a good design is where you can be doing things all the time. So when we worked with them, we worked with their board, and we had their board go out and do what we call our place game, which is to evaluate, like a group evaluated this little area right there. Well, now you might look at that and think that's great. There's some flower stalls and a Starbucks coffee and this. But when you start looking at this a little bit more, you begin to realize it's not laid out very well. It isn't functioning very well. So we found 21 places within it and adjacent to it. One of the problems here is that the light rail blocks all the uses on this side. So maybe we've suggested that they might considering it moving it back a block so that this really reaches across and also enhances the building and draws the buildings in. Sorry. Wait a second, I'm going back. I should be going the other way. Okay, so here. So we found these 21 places that if they were made to work on an ongoing basis, there's no place you can have beer there. There's no place you can have dinner and candlelight dinner. Not a place in the whole area. So it's not working at night. It doesn't draw in the variety of people that it could. And yet it draws in enormous numbers of people for puppet shows and some chess, and they partner with the zoo. They have flower festivals in that space, fabulously successful. An Italian festival, they think they're the center of the earth, which is a good idea, and a first night festival. And this is where they get their revenue from. Remember I said about multiple sources of revenue, and they have a budget that manages this and a private nonprofit group that manages this. And this is the range of events they have. And they asked us to work in the January, February, March period, but we ended up getting them to realize that they had to work on the whole period of time and make the place work when there was no programming. And these are the kinds of events they have. Only 22% of the days are unprogrammed, but then they have all these other things that go on. So you can almost always find something happening there, but you wouldn't go there necessarily if nothing was happening. So just sort of summarizing a little bit, is that traffic, transit, and pedestrian, the inner park and the outer park, the attractions and destinations, identity and image, flexibility, amenities, management, seasonal strategies, and diverse funding sources. And then going over to the market idea, if you can build neighborhoods through local economies and public markets, that's the direction to go in. And you ought to have a whole series of markets all over the city that are incubators for small businesses. The work we've done is unequivocal that these markets are a way of providing upward mobility and social integration for the different ethnic groups that make up the cities of today. What's become so marvelous about most of our cities is that we've become much more diverse. But the diversity hasn't really been integrated into the communities very well. So we can benefit from that enormously by drawing in those cultures and having them play an important role as we redefine our cities. And that makes them enormously richer than they are now. So this is a Home Depot in Mexico City, and you can imagine what that does. And this is a market in another Mexican city, Guadalajara, that has government offices over it. And there are hundreds of businesses in this, and there's one business in this. Well, they have a McDonald's and a, and a couple of other stores. But, what's the choice? We're imposing a way of life on a whole culture that doesn't live that way. They live this way. And it's so much richer. And if we could live this way, it would be so much richer for us than living that way. We think that Home Depot or Walmart is to a community what cigarettes are to a human being. Okay? So, and a place like this, you may know Pike Place Market in Seattle. If you go to Seattle, you go to the market. Well, so do people who live there. This is a part of the soul of Seattle. And it's, we go there a lot, and we stay in the hotel there. And, I spend my birthdays in markets all over the world. There's nothing like a market anywhere. So what do markets do? This is what, from a customer's point of view, we have a whole market training program in a month where we get people from all over the world. But for business opportunities, entertainment, freshness, convenience, help economy, price, products, brings people together. Those are the benefits of a market. Now put that up against a Walmart, and what are the benefits of a Walmart to a community? So, how do we get great streets? This is your challenge, and the one that could truly transform your city, without any question. Yes? Well, we helped set up the Main Street Center back when it got started. And we started a whole idea of management and downtown management. And we set up a whole bunch of management districts, about 30 of them. But we've kind of gone much more into this idea of placemaking and making places along a street. You see, the idea of a street with destinations on it rather than streetscape is very different. We would never use the word streetscape. I abhor the word because it imposes a design idea on a street and on a community instead of finding the 10 destinations in 5 blocks and building on those and creating places around them. Dramatically different. It's a Main Street approach. We just we're much more about placemaking, and we do that. I mean, it's just different, and they're good. They're very good. Yeah. I would make a market the place so that Home Depot wouldn't be able to come in from the people that in the community that know how to get that. I mean, I went to a Home Depot once, and then I went back to our neighborhood hardware store, and I got everything we needed in our neighborhood's hardware store. Within 5 minutes, I went to Home Depot, and I couldn't find anything, and no one could tell me where to find it.
But we don't have neighborhood hardware stores anymore.
So there are people who would like to start them again. But there's a whole culture that would come back in if you created the environment for it. You've been isolated away from that experience. Where I live in Brooklyn, I haven't been to a supermarket. I go to a supermarket twice a year to buy toilet paper. But I have a great meat store, a great fish store, a great bakeries. I got lots of bakeries. I live in an Italian neighborhood, so I have a few things like that. And we know everyone that we buy from, and they know us, and they know what we want, and so on. So the richest man in the whole city of Brooklyn is the butcher. He owns 18 brownstones, and the brownstones are now worth $2 to $4 million a piece. And he bought them. And he was telling me the other day that he bought one for $20,000, and the guy next door said, "You've got to be crazy. I'll sell you mine. You want it? I'll sell it to you for $22,000." And he bought it. And that's how he bought 30 years ago, and now they're worth $2 to $2.5 to $3 million a piece. So, and he's the butcher. He says, "What do you think? I'm just a dumb butcher, and everyone else, thought I was dumb when I was doing it, and now look at what I've got."
Hey, on the architects and egos, can you comment on Christo in that?
Oh, that was wonderful.
Was it?
Yeah, it was spiritual.
Was it?
It was really, really, really great. And I went to it 4 times.
Really?
Yeah.
I saw the gates growing up. It's impressed on my memory. I was maybe 7.
Yeah.
Or the running fence.
Yeah,
the running
right.
Fence. And I know it's controversial, and I just was wondering.
Well, what it did is it brought people out in great numbers in the middle of winter, and everyone was smiling and talking to each other. It was one of those kind of ways to bring people together, and it was just people will talk about it for 20 years. And being there was something, and people came from all over the world in the middle of February to go and walk in temperature that was 5 degrees or 10 degrees, and it was just spectacular. So, you know, those kinds of events are wonderful to do.
You call that an event. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that was really an event, yeah, and a wonderful one, and nothing wrong with that. So, creating a great street, you know, these are a boulevard in Barcelona, but Jane Jacobs said the erosion of cities by automobiles proceeds as a kind of nibbling. Small nibbles at first, but eventually hefty bites. A street is widened here, another is straightened there. A wide avenue is converted to one-way flow, and more land goes into parking. No one step in this process is in itself crucial, but cumulatively the effect is enormous. So you've had this nibbling effect on every street in your community, and you've got to nibble back. And you've got to think of every street as a public space and as a street. So, you know, we've done surveys. This is down in Belmont Shore in Southern California about safety issues. Traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and noise was off the charts. Crime during the day and crime in the evening was there. Our police are out there solving crimes, and we're thinking that these are the safety concerns that we're more concerned about. And when you build a street that's for cars and not for people, guess what? You've got to find a way to get across it. So that helps. If at least you got, you know, 8 people together, your friends, and they're all older people, so it's a little bit not a good idea to kill 8 people in the middle of the main street of your town. But what's going on, and this is not far from here in Roseville, is that we have these big advertisements now saying that these new cars are so big and they're scary. What a terrible thing that we're doing. We are building cars that have no sense of community whatsoever. Imagine that car driving through my neighborhood. I think I would go out and stone it. I would be so aggressive because our streets are narrow. I can walk across them anywhere. The children in my neighborhood should not be confronted with that kind of stuff. And yet that's what we're imposing. That's what our culture is imposing on us right now, is this kind of stuff that is totally anti-human. And it's sort of building up this whole idea of fear. And this is right near here in Roseville. Around the worst environment I've ever been in my life was the auto mall in Roseville. I mean, I can't tell you. I come from a very small place, New York City. From a scale point of view, everything around me is kind of at a scale that is comfortable. And I came to Roseville, and everything around me was at a scale I was uncomfortable with. It was humongous relative to me. So I felt I was a midget in Roseville, and I feel important in New York. What an amazing thing. So anyway, you know the automobile trips and the walking trips, and you know the obesity stuff. But what we really realize is that when you get streets that are heavy traffic, we don't know the people on the other side of the street, whereas we do if we have light traffic. So the whole idea, every neighborhood street here could become slightly narrower, could become more walkable. Every commercial street ought to be thought about in a slower version than it is. And I'll show you what I mean by that. And we can transform our streets very quickly. This works, and I guess you have a lot of rocks around, so you could just bring rocks into the downtown. And if that doesn't work, you can just begin to occupy parking spaces with human beings. That's illegal in some communities. And when it gets interesting, we get out of our strollers. We want to be in these places, walking in them. And this is a very simple idea, but this jewelry store is located next to a bank in Lexington Avenue right here. And 35,000 people walk on this sidewalk every day. But this jewelry store doesn't like being located there. Notice how his window is canted so that people walking up can see. And he says, I don't like being here because I'm next to a bank and it takes 2 or 3 stores for people to get back into a window shopping rhythm. Isn't that amazing? So there's a whole street rhythm. And your streets here are more car rhythm than they are pedestrian rhythm. So a great street in Germany, very tight dimensions, very slow driving, angle parking. They take parking spaces out to put independent restaurants, and people watch people. Well, you need more places to watch people. So you have to, you know, there's a whole street psychology that needs to be brought back. And designing your streets for your neighborhood, this is coming into a neighborhood. Here we get closer, and then we turn it around. Guess what? Here's a neighborhood street. So you can do that. People begin to walk and bicycle, guess what, on a neighborhood street. And roundabouts, you have some beautiful roundabouts, but you can even do a better job of them. They're actually pretty good. And this is where a truck comes through, but people go 5 miles an hour around here. It's child-friendly, community-friendly, and that's important. If you design your city around children and people, guess what? You'll have happy children and good neighborhoods. So here's the street. Here's a street exercise, and this is fascinating. This is a town called Littleton. It's a little town, about 8,000 people in northern New Hampshire. It's a beautiful town. This is their vision for their community: eat in diners, ride trains, put a porch on your house, shop on Main Street, live in a walkable community. Pretty good goals. And here it is. This is the Opera House, which is really the town hall. You know, opera houses were built around town halls because people would go to the opera house and to the town hall, and ballrooms and things like that. And this is the post office and the courthouse. It's a federal building. And here's the town. Pretty nice town. Great streets, great signs. They have a movie theater. That is a wonderful movie theater. And this is it. And these are the destinations. Here's the courthouse right here. And here's the whoops, sorry. And there's the opera house right there. And these are all the destinations in that town. But there's a problem, is that it works in this area. It used to work for the whole town. You used to come to one part of town and walk through the whole town. Now you come to one part of the town and stay in there and drive to the next part of town because of the way the traffic has defined that community. So our job was to bring it together, bring those two sections together, but where the Opera House, it was ruined by the traffic engineers, we have to do that, and then we can bring it down along the river, and we can build a whole town that is now walkable from one end to the other, and when you're in one end, you think you're in downtown. So here's the courthouse. There's the community center with the information booth, the library, a retail store that only has one entrance into everything, so it needs entrances all along it. And then this is the biggest use in town, where people come and buy cigarettes, and Thayer's Inn, which is a historic hotel. So this is that stretch. And so what people wanted was they wanted a place to open their mail and have a coffee cart right in front of the library so that they could be there with their friends. And they wanted a little garden in front of the community center along with the information center, and they wanted entrances into the building, and they wanted a way to get into the library from the street. And then we put the parking to support that activity, so that the street is narrowed so that we get back to where it's more comfortable. And so all these things are done all the way down to the end. But then what happens is that's there, then you have a dead building. And that kills that stretch, and then you have an empty lot. So you've lost that little piece, and we have to bring that back by redoing that building. And there's a lot of people in that building, but you can't tell what's going on in it. So those are those two. And then we have this problem, because they have gradually taken out all the pedestrian movements except for one. If you want to, and it's so wide that it's no longer the destination that it needs to be. So someone came up with the idea of moving this back and creating a little plaza there and making this intersection again and bringing a monument that used to be there in the middle of the main street. And we have some dead buildings again, suburban buildings brought right into the downtown. And then the bridge coming over is an off-the-rack bridge, so we'll narrow that. And then we'll create a walkway down along the water behind the building and use the back of this building. And then a gateway. And then there's this wonderful ice cream store next to a bank, but there's a wall between the ice cream store and the bank. So the bank president and the owner of the ice cream store are standing out here, and we asked them why they had a wall between them, and they didn't know the answer. So, you can now pull them together, because why can't you go to the bank and the ice cream store at the same time? And so then we can start, and this is where the ice cream store is right out here, and that's where the courthouse, and there's a school out there and another little neighborhood area we can actually begin to make it so the whole town is walkable again, and you quadruple the amount of parking, because no longer do you have to park right here. You can park here and walk there, so you've just added a whole lot of parking. So that's returning a street back to historically what it was, or you can turn it into the future street of how to make one. So you have a lot of streets like that have lots of holes in them that need to be thought about holistically, and that will transform your community. So this is the end. This is the section that you want, and I love this the most, too. We're trying to set up a situation where instead of having people sit back to back, that doesn't mean they don't love each other, but we'd rather see people kissing. This is in Barcelona. This is not the most comfortable seating in the world. And it's a little hard to communicate with your friends. This woman is kind of alone out there, a little protective. And these two people, they can sit there and it's okay. They can do a pretty good job of kissing, I guess. But this is why they did it. They wanted to keep these people from sitting on the benches. Well, they don't care whether they're lying on the ground or sitting on the bench. So they designed human activity out because of those people. And so affection. You know, affection is, good places breed affection, without any question. But now this is Zurich, and they did these artist-designed benches. Well, we took about 300 pictures of all the benches and people sitting on them, and we came back to New York, and we began to realize that people were sitting on benches that they were meant to sit on, and not sitting on benches they weren't meant to sit on. So we figured out that these people eat mushrooms. Doesn't it look like that? And this couple are perfect for that. I mean, can you imagine anything that would embrace their personality better than that? And these people need a little elevation in their life. This guy is absolutely a barber or a pharmacist or whatever, but he's sitting, he's comfortable there. And these people need a little bit of a frill. And I should get back. This is almost at the end. I'm sorry for this so long. And these guys, you know, they're avant-garde, right? And they wore the pants and sat on the bench. And these three people looks like they were either the model for the painting or they just felt that that was the place to go. And this ball and that suitcase are part of that bench. And, you know, it couldn't be better for them. And then this guy, now, he wouldn't be caught dead on any of those other benches. So, if you think about this and all the different kinds of personalities that a community has, and they all do, how do we understand and support all the different kinds of personalities? So we've got a lot of work to do to get to, you know, to this level. And so getting back to the idea of affection, I've always thought this was me, but I took the picture. I always wanted it to be. Isn't that nice to be adored like that? Or this. Or this, you know, you get a good place and you get wonderful feelings. You know, you can't look at that and not say, wow, isn't that great? Well, that's what a good place does. Or this. These are 3 generations of women all giggling on a bench donated by someone in a community. It doesn't get better than that until this. At, you know, 80 years old, sitting with someone you love and your arm around them. What a great thing. How, do we have those places? We got to get those. Those are the most important places in the world. Or this one, where this kid was sitting over here on this bench, and he decided to come over here and sit down and see what it was going to be like in 70 years. Because you know that those people were there 70 years ago, and you know that that guy is still there. Because he's in a community where that is a precious activity. Now, this is public seating in Paris. Okay? Now, Paris always shows everyone else the way to go. So look at Paris. There's a whole story around Paris and amenity. But that is public seating. In the summertime, they close the main street along the river and put a beach there, Paris Plage. Well, that's the way to treat citizens. So if we define our communities around places, then we need to take a different fork in the road.